a lot of love around over the festive season, but not how you think. Well, how do we know? More Aussie babies are born on September 17 than any other day of the year. So if you do the math and backtrack, that means the Christmas and New Year holidays are about when they're conceived. So how do couples handle it when a baby is on the way?
Margie's pregnant? No!
Wow, Dad, you really threw a tantrum like a little sissy girl?
Oh, just that one time.
Actually, when I was about to have Bart...
You're pregnant?
And then when I told him about Lisa...
You're pregnant again?
So to avoid losing all that hair, how can couples know that they are baby ready? Let's ask psychotherapist and counsellor Melissa Ferrari. It's nice to see you, Melissa. I tell you what, a baby can just huge changes to a relationship. What sort of changes do they make, do you think?
Well, we're actually meant to travel in pairs. We like to be a twosome. So what happens when a child is born? It really interrupts that process because there's another, and that the two of you have to deal with, while this baby belongs to both of you, it's still an intrusion on the relationship. So it creates all kind of dynamics, psychologically particularly, because it really rocks that apple cart that you've both been used to for so long.
So it's a third wheel, basically.
Basically,
it's like when you go
something-
out on a date and John O'Coleman shows up.
That's right, something like that. I don't know what that's like.
Let's face it, a lot more women would be keen, but how do they raise that issue and get a discussion going without looking too keen?
Well, in terms of the discussion, I think that it's important that you do look keen around, we need to discuss what this means for us as a couple, because it's going to create those kind of psychological shifts that say, it's not just me and you. So it's kind of like, you do need to look keen about talking about it because it's a really, really important big thing, as we know.
I love what Wendy Harmer said once, said all you have to do is mention the fact that you'd like to have a baby one day and the bloke you're talking to starts tunnelling out of the kitchen. We've been talking a lot about postnatal depression for mothers and how even new dads can also have postnatal depression. What about that? Is that just people not managing their expectations properly? Or what can we do?
Well, I think it's about that conversation, being very deliberate about what does this mean for the two of us as a couple. But basically for men, you know, there's that real primitive instinct that I've got to take care of everything, the hunter-gatherer kind of thinking that doesn't go away. And so I think that creates a lot of pressure for men. It's like, this child's come along, I've got to take care of my wife who's been through so much physically and mentally herself. And so it really is quite disruptive for him, and because of being the caretaker.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's certainly how I feel.
Yeah.
So mums can be experts at worrying about the kids. How can we deal with that?
Well, I think that it's important to know that you will worry. You know, it's a natural thing, particularly for some where there's been a history of trauma for somebody. It will get triggered when you have a baby, and I'm not saying always will, but quite often we can wonder, why does this feel so anxiety-provoking because I've had a child? And usually, if you can start to look at your own history, you might find some things there that's going to help you understand why this big responsibility has triggered a lot.
I have to say, I'm not whinging about it, but I've found ever since having kids that all this stuff that happened in my childhood that I thought I'd completely forgotten about and never bothered me in the slightest for decades has just come flooding back and turned me into an absolute mess.
You know, Joe, I love your honesty about that because I think this is really, really important, that when we are going to have a child, it's going to provoke things, particularly, interestingly enough, when they meet those developmental stages, when something happened to you, it's almost like clockwork, and it's like, what's going on here? And so as a couple, being able to understand how important it is to know we are going to get provoked. Sometimes it's lovely and engaging and it's fun and we love our child and all that's good. But on the other side is we will get provoked psychologically.
Just buy them another toy, that's what
Can a baby ever save a relationship?
I think a baby can, because what it does is, I think it can, because what it does is it makes a couple realise we've got to make this environment very safe and secure. So it's not only doing that for the child, but it's also doing it for the couple, that we both need to make this all good for all of us on
That's
board.
best case scenario.
Yeah, that
though,
is
right?
best
They often
case
call them
scenario.
Band-Aid babies
It will-
and think sometimes it can be the end of a couple.
Well, it can, and well, for some who do their work, which I'm a big advocate for, of being able to understand that safety and security and that nest is what creates a good atmosphere for a child. And then you've got the opposite, where people go in. There's not a lot of talking about it, not a lot of what's going to happen when one of us are provoked psychologically, what will happen if it affects one of us from a mental health issue. And so you've got those two extremes where some people really bunker down and say, let's do this. And then others are kind of like, it'll be right.
It does make you grow up pretty fast to have a baby.
It does.
What about getting some men who not necessarily are huge communicators? Sometimes you could basically get a can opener and try and open up their, emotional well. How should people approach that?
Well, I think if it's becoming problematic...
Or is
and
that so old age?
Yeah,
A bloke's sort of so much better to talk to
Oh,
these
and
days.
these days they won't bloody shut up. Talk about my
You're hanging
feelings,
around the right
whatever.
people then, Joe.
Yeah.
I think that opening up is something for, women and men that's difficult. And again, if psychologically you can create that kind of safety that you can do that, that's great. But for many, I think a good couple therapist that can help work that stuff through is very important. Because,
Even what about before they have the baby, get ready for it?
Yeah, like have a chat to a therapist, are we both ready for this? And be able to work, iron out a
Do we
few
both want
anxieties.
this?
Exactly.
Because a lot of people go into a relationship thinking,
that's right.
OK, all right, I'm going to have a baby, and husband or wife doesn't want it.
Yeah.
You
They
can't just
don't.
all of a sudden
Maybe have a
turn
chat
it
to your
around.
chemist and buy a packet of condoms.
Well, maybe. But I think what's great about what you're saying there is, Sarah, that a lot of people actually decide to not have children. And they're really clear on that because they've had their own historical trauma, and so they decide, I don't really want to have kids. And so if you get with someone that really does, you want to be having that conversation.
That's where counselling helps. Great tips that you have brought to us today. Be prepared for a lot of change. Have an honest discussion about kids. Support each other's mental health. Find time for each other. Get counselling to heal beforehand. All really good advice. Melissa Ferrari, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Now, after the break, the tasty dinner...